So our next speaker now is Kevin Aquino. So Dr. Kevin Aquino was awarded his PhD in physics from USyd, University of Sydney in Australia, and served as a research fellow at Monash University in Australia in Melbourne, and the University of Nottingham in the UK. Since 2022, he is the scientific director of BrainKey, which is a neurology startup out of Palo Alto in California. So very excited to hear some of the stuff from Silicon Valley. Is this Silicon Valley or am I wrong?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Great. Okay, looking forward to hearing from this. If you'd like to share your screen.
Cool. Let me just that one. Okay, is that all good? Perfect.
We are on the right
Okay,
one now.
great, perfect. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me, specifically Fernanda. I was happy to take the call and to give this talk. Today I'll be talking about, oops, sorry. Yeah, transferable skills in the startup space. So I guess some of my topics and some of my questions and experiences were really overlaps with Ira's experience. So hopefully there's some nice synergy there, and you can all take away a common message. Um, so so for disclosure, I'm an employee and shareholder of BrainKey Inc. So if I paint in a good light, it's because I really invested in this company. So just a bit of a contents. I'll talk a little bit about my pathway, about my job, what my role is, and our company. And I really want to then focus on some transferable skills and some skills to work on if you are considering the transition from academia to some kind of industry. I know there were some questions there in the chat about various things, and hopefully this also answers some of these questions. So basically, my path from as an academic into an industry role, I mean, I was very much a traditional academic. I did an undergraduate, I went to an honors degree in Australia, which is like a master's everywhere else. Then a PhD, then I went to postdoc after postdoc after postdoc. And I had the idea always that if I do 3 postdocs, I have to figure out, do I still want to be in here? Have I got a track to be in a tenure position or not? And then from then on, I'll decide I'll get out or not. That was my decision to get out. So I guess my pathway wasn't really a traditional pathway, but I don't think there are many traditional pathways when you're making this sort of transition from one to the other. What I really want to do, I guess, like in the previous talk as well, was to get a glimpse of what the industry was like while I was in academia. For the same reasons some of you might have who are thinking about it, job security, financial stability. At this point, I had, when I made this sort of ideas thought, I had my young daughter and I didn't want to uproot my family again. Some of you might be who on multiple postdocs will understand the struggles of these things. So what I did is that I wanted to really get a taste by doing some freelance work. So I didn't go down the intern route. I signed up to a freelancing website, upwork.com, and I found just various little contracts I could do. And one of them that really spoke to me, which I spent a lot of time, was in BrainKey, the company I'm employed at now. It required a lot of my skill set to work in MRI, to work at surfaces, visualization, ticked all the boxes. So I would say there's a little element of luck in there, but what I found was it opened up my eyes to the big wide world of the med biotech sphere. That's currently going on. It's actually getting a bit of a resurgence, not resurgence. It's growing pretty loud, pretty big. A lot of money being put into things such as longevity and so forth. So I started to work in that space, freelancing. I also did a freelance short time for work in pharma biotech. I can't release who they were, but I would use essentially all my MRI skills of segmentation and analysis. So that's essentially how I went from my academic position to something in the startup space. So I wanted to bring forward that idea of the startup space a little more, is that I think it is very close to working in academia. The reasons why, a lot of these companies work off funding, just like in academia. You start with seed funding, it's like a small grant, like a PhD grant or something like that. And then you get bigger grants. You start to get some venture capital to to form a bigger part of the company, and then you go into like these series round funding. So like even like think of like investigate or like big national grants you can think of in your own country. So that happens, at a later stage of a company. I think Uber had like a Series G funding for millions of dollars, that type of stuff. So they still get funded by these processes as well. Um, and in also in the startup space as well, you work on very new intellectual property. So they're very open to new ideas to disrupt whatever market they're in, which I think is really it's very similar to what you experience in academia. Um, Connections are also incredibly important in the startup space, or I mean, kind of industry space as well. So who it's just like in academia, if you know the right person, you can essentially find a new line of research or a new sort of a field that you might be interested in. And also, it might surprise you, but there are a lot of former academics and with PhDs and so forth in the startup space and just in this sort of industry in general. This is even before kind of the big shift from everyone leaving academia, which happened since COVID sort of thing. But before then, there are many academics who went off to start their own companies. We have one advisor who works with us, and he was on tenure track, working at Loney, working with Arthur Togo, the big guys in neuroimaging at the time. And he just wanted translation. He wanted to make his work have a lot of direct impact. So he left academia for that reason and a tenure position for that reason. So a lot of people like that who are in the startup space who are really excited to, the words disrupt the market, change, certain markets and so forth. So that's general what startups are like. And I think if you're thinking about this stuff, it's something you should really pay attention to if you want something quite similar to your academic experience. So the company I work for now is BrainKey.ai. So what we do, so exactly that pathway I mentioned, we were accelerated by Y Combinator, which is an acceleration programs is when you take a startup and people give them money to if they're a promising company at a very early stage and so forth. And so the aim of our company is to really bring insights from MRI to the consumer, to physicians and doctors and so forth. So you can think about a lot of things that people are doing in MRI space, like sizes of hippocampus or ventricles, all these things, and then provide them in the context of the population. That's our company, what we really try to do. We try to get more than just T1 images, trying to get multimodal images and so forth. And we really try to target, the longevity space and healthy living. That's also getting a lot of attention as people age. It's the same kind of ideas you have in academia, when you write grants that the population is aging and so forth. And so we're on the company side to doing these things and getting these sort of methods and these ideas straight to to people to use these in translational. So we work towards personalized reporting our personalized medicine, that idea as well. Things such as normative modeling, all these things you hear about in the academic field, and we're trying to work on as well putting these in hospitals, and that means working with FDA approved products. So making these products to be FDA cleared. Another little shout out as well, like of our company. We just recently featured in a BBC documentary on aging. This is actually I generated this as well for the documentary, which is kind of a nice thing to have earlier this year. We also do things such as we try to even do things like do 3D prints of people's brains. It's an MMA wrestler, Jiri Prochaska. I might be pronouncing his name wrong, but he's got here his own MRI. His brain actually printed for him, which we did for him, and we've done for multiple people as well. And this really changes how people think about their brain. And if you're someone who's recruiting patients and so forth in the clinic, you'll know that if you just show someone the image of their brain, they're so excited about it. It really helps with just subject retention and all these things. So what's my role there in BrainKey? I say I'm a scientific director. That's my role, of course. I oversee, a lot of scientific medical research, but quite often in startups as well, in early stage startups, you do a lot of stuff. So it's like in academia, we have like an omnibus sort of role. So I work with clients, I head up the regulatory affairs, so we're going to FDA applications. I support the full stack environment. So for example, I do help work on the back end running, these Docker containers and things. You work also in MRI. If you're at the moment you're in MRI space, also working on visual elements as well, and as well as algorithm development, trying to get more and more algorithms into our workflow and so forth. So that's generally, the startup space or Branky is and what my role is in the company. Um, I wanted to focus the rest of the talk, not on me, but on general, what are skills that can help going from academia to an industry. I'm going to sort of separate in two different slides. So the first one, I'll talk about the general skills that help out in industry, so to speak, general industry skills, and also then the next slide would be on in the med biotech sphere. So I had these two columns here. So one of them on the left-hand side is product management. That's something that's done a lot in a lot of industries. And the academic experience or equivalent, I would say, would be, working on very big omnibus workflows where you might have this experience at the moment where you're building an entire pipeline from experimental to design to DICOM extraction from a scanner or to actually scan someone to analyzing data, writing a report, completing a PhD at times, or all the way through to writing papers and so forth. So having that experience of having an incredibly large thing that's just focused on you, you've been able to dive into all these things all at once. And if you're happy to be go into product management side, you can also dive into things as well and understand these things. Like it's really good experience to have this omnibus experience in the industry as a product manager. The previous talk also mentioned people sometimes really go into strategy and product manager because there's something they like in academia and they can also translate that way too. Another industry skill is communicating very complex ideas. So things such as like scientific outreach, mentoring students, master students, undergrad students. If you've been on like press releases, that type of stuff, that's something experience they can really translate. That's really important in industry, especially if you're talking about a tech advancement, a tech change. If you have a meeting with shareholders, with your bosses, that type of stuff. If you had all the experience in your PhD or in your postdoc academic career of distilling complex information, that was really, really important in industry as well. Some people actually go into scientific communication for big companies as well because they have this skill. Wearing many hats, I just explained, all these benefits of having that. Another one I talk about is programming. I think that I'm putting that last. I would say it's an obvious skill if you want to get into kind of a tech-heavy role. But I really just focus on these tech-heavy roles. But understanding MATLAB, not so important, but maybe Python, C++ scripting. I will say that when I mention this is that you will often get roles that are, you need to know XYZ code. But often in many companies, you'll be shifting codes to a different type of language. We will be optimizing a new protocol in a new type of language. And your experience of learning these things on the fly really helps you because you can then pick up these skill sets and help out where you can as well, which is really quite interesting and quite useful. In the med biotech sort of specific range, I will say for me, I'm working in an MRI company. So of course, all my work in MRI is applicable. And if you also work, so there are a lot of companies that do MRI of not just the brain, but also a neck, lungs, heart, and so forth, various parts of the body. Next skill, I would say, is statistical population inferences. If you work in the med biotech sphere, if you do any type of analysis, you always want to know the result relative to the population because you might see incidental findings in a whole bunch of. You might see this when you're doing an MRI on your cohort, you're doing an experiment, that type of stuff. So you have to always know, where do these results lie in the population? This is also a very big thing in the med biotech sphere is, how normal is this? How abnormal is this? So this work I think it's a big push in academia. So if you kind of focus on this as well, this is quite useful in that sphere. Another one is like I call this limitation and challenges in MRI research. So if you have experience in experimental design, changing things on the fly, changing MRI protocols and so forth, that would really be helpful when you're trying to apply a new line of work in the industry as well. Another one I also was mentioned previously was about robust and reproducible analysis. So if you're academic now, you know about the reproducibility crisis. It's quite huge. There's a lot of papers about that, and you might be doing this yourself in your own studies. Where you're doing quality control measures like having a docker to make sure all analyses are all consistent, or just big QC checks or QA checks. I did all of that in my postdoc, and that really helped. Just a way to think about work in terms of how can you make all these things, how can you test if things are quality controlled. You might get a bad scanning imaging quality or bad results and so forth. All these skills you might have had in academia are incredibly important. Sometimes there are roles that just to work on quality assurance. These are big roles, not just in the startup space and in general across a lot of engineering companies and so forth. Another one as well is probably applicable to most coding type tech kind of roles is version control or analysis. So I've just listed here two kind of charts of transferable skills and things that are quite similar between my academic experience and what I've seen in the med biotech industry. I want to talk now about things that are different and things you should be aware of when you're going in there, or just if you're curious about how this all works. So one of the big things I think is teamwork, and I've experienced this as well in multiple kind of products in here and so forth. It'd be quite different. So I think the typical idea of teamwork in a good academic lab, a good one, not everyone has this, is that if you have, for example, a workflow, we have to go from a DICOM, from a scanner, so some MRI, all the way to analysis. You might be starting in a PhD or a postdoc, and this is your skill. You're in the green here, right? A good lab would have the following people. They will have person A, B, C, and D, and they might teach you, for example, this is really difficult to get a DICOM from a scanner because of these weird intricacies of the scanner you're using. Or, the Nifty to Python might be really, really hard because of the way this Nifty is formed and so forth. So everyone teaches you something really interesting that you can all work these things out. But typically what happens, even in a good lab in academia, is that, you do all that work. So you might get taught all these things, and this whole pipeline from start to finish, you do all of this, or it's all on you. And this could be really exciting for you, or it could be something that you really hate doing. I'm a bit of both of these things, I would say. But this is a very common thing I see all the time. And this is if you're in a good lab. Sometimes there are no person B to teach you this one, or no person D here. So this is like a very good example of teamwork. So you do all the work, but you're taught everything. However, I find in my industry roles is that it's very different. So very often, it's not always the case, but I found in my experience, if this is your skill here, then this is your work. And then often what happens if you have a good team, of course, if you have a good team, you might have person A doing this work, person B doing this work, and C and D. And so I found in my experience that I tell this surprises people that it is quite collegial. I found my experience to be more collegial than academia because people are working towards a common goal. Not always the case, I know that, but I found this is a very common thing that happens. Because sometimes in these big projects, these people have their own kind of line of work that they're working towards, their own, I would say, different KPIs they're meeting. I find in academia, sometimes you're all working for the same pot of research, funding and so forth. So it's something that's quite different. So often you might have to be able to be a cog into this big wheel, but also work with your team. So I find it's quite, my experience would be quite nice because I can work with person A and we can collaborate together and they do that work. If I have a problem, I report to them and we get all this done all in one go from start to finish. So teamwork is very, very different in academia, especially if you're in a role which goes from ideas to product to execution. Um, so yeah, sometimes might have to learn this omnibus behavior. You need to lean on people and to trust people. Sometimes people struggle with this, um, but if you're in these type of roles which have a big team, you might have to unlearn this behavior. Um, I'll say soft skills then become quite important, how to interact with your fellow person, and to be able to communicate, issues and be able to talk to your line manager and so forth. So I find academia often rewards you for being a solo sort of a person doing everything yourself. Um, so yeah, definitely, again, working with a team is incredibly important. And time management as well has to be something which is very, very different. That goes, I'll explain it a little bit as well, time management. But as well, another skill that's really quite important is that I guess robustness is has a larger emphasis of novelty. So things that should be robust and have to work again and again and again. You think of something like, and it's not the equivalent thing, but think of having designing a car from a car company. If the car has to, of course, be robust and not just be novel or a new shiny thing. That's often the emphasis there in these companies. Um, Another thing too, I think the last speaker also mentioned this, is that sometimes these small effects you might have dead ends. You might have to find them very, very quickly. I find that if things don't work out and they're not quite apparent, they're essentially an effect you have to move on from. So, for example, you might find a case control difference of some type of analysis that has a 0.049 that just plus some p-value. That won't work in the real world. An effect has to be real, has to be essentially obvious. So, the thing that I found in my PhD was that I get a project, I may have to make something work, and something doesn't work, and obviously almost all the time it's like I've done this wrong. Or on a postdoc as well, you're kind of spending months and months trying to figure out why something doesn't work. um, After you get be a bit more trust in yourself, and if it's not obvious, then it's most likely a marginal effect and possibly a dead end that you can't spend time on. And it's the same point there, is that you have to really move on, because every single project is costing money and costing time, and as well, things have to be finished quite quickly. That's pretty much my summary. Like, it was not conventional, but I don't know if it ever really is. Um, you're not really just going to be applying to a company and so forth without having this type of approach. I would say also startup space is really suited to some of you who are wanting something like an academic, sort of high paced and a little bit chaotic, but also fun in that way. You're providing things that are well first type of stuff. Many academic skills are transferable. Tom mentioned this before. You might not know how many skills are, but something, for example, like you might be someone who has performed an experiment to work at the Satamus, like for example, discovering the brain responses or somatosensory responses, or like a visual response, something like that. But along the way, you've had to organize things such as IRB, internal research protocols. You might have to actually organize volunteers, and do all this type of logistic stuff that all these skills are also transferable, just working with soft skills, people and organizations. I also say too that there are some differences, but I have welcomed most of these differences in terms of, if I were to put a pros and cons, I think I'm very much in the pros, not just for some of the things you might think of in terms of like work-life balance, I guess, a remuneration, but also I think if you're working in a company like this in the med biotech sphere, translation can be quite quick, and you can make a difference in people's lives a lot faster than just writing this in a grant to say, that this work could one day benefit society. You can be doing that a lot faster and with your own hands, so to speak. If you have any questions, please just send me an email, or on my LinkedIn as in my name, or my Blue Sky tag there. And if I don't reply to your email, just send it again. Because I'm a dad of two kids, and sometimes things fall through the cracks. But I'll try to answer your email. Yeah, and that's it.